Hi, this is Kimberley. This is a synopsis and critique of Chapter 21 of the book My Daddy is a Hero, How Chris Watts Went from Family Man to Family Killer by Lena Derhally. The title of this chapter is Protect and Prevent. Another long-ass chapter, and oh my god, it's the last one. Now y'all don't freak out, don't start hollering and crying and shit. Frankly, I'd jump up and down for joy, but my boobs are too big for that nonsense. Just know I'm not going anywhere. I still have a final thoughts video, plus I'm going to do a mashup of all my bitching, complaining, and hell raising that I did throughout the book. I did that when I finished the letters from Christopher bullshit. That amounted to about 3 straight hours of hell raising. If you missed those special little gems, I'll provide the link in the description. My late paternal grandma would be so proud of me. If one just closes their eyes and listens to me bitching, one may be taken back to rural Georgia in the 1940s and 1950s. Someone taking a leisurely Sunday drive would hear the hollering and echoing through the fields of cotton. My dad would tell horror stories of picking cotton until his fingers bled, going to school barefoot with a basket of eggs so he and his brothers could trade it for school lunch, and trying to plow fields with a stubborn-ass mule. He would often compare that mule to my mother after he had had dinner, read the newspaper, and gotten a few drinks under his belt. These photos are not my own depicting my father, but it really is very similar to his circumstances. And yes, just as you've probably heard before, the family really did take a bath on a Saturday night, so they would be clean and proper looking for worshiping the Lord at Salem Baptist Church on Sunday. My father and his 3 brothers had 2 outfits each. The outfit of overalls they wore all week to go to school in and work the fields in. And then they had their Sunday best. After church is when all the hell raising would start. Some toe-curling vulgar language would come out of Grandma's mouth, the same mouth that had just raised her voice to the Lord, singing hymns only an hour earlier. It would echo down the fields of cotton that were empty of workers just for the one sacred day. The cotton tried to absorb her foul language, but it was a powerful force. Just like Grandma, she was energetic, robust, strapping, strong, sturdy, vigorous, authoritative, commanding, and she had no damn time for foolishness. I'm told that I'm like her in many ways, except I don't have hell-raising Sundays, as they became affectionately known. I just get on YouTube and start spouting vulgarities and profanities. It's all cathartic and shit. Oh, what the hell was I talking about? Oh yes, the last chapter of My Daddy is a Big Fat Flaming Asshole Zero. Miss Lena starts the chapter saying there is evidence of premeditation. In the beginning, and well, still now, people debate on whether or not Pinhead just snapped, or if this was premeditated. Miss Lena says, quote, "It makes sense to want to believe he snapped, because the idea of premeditation is so creepy and frightening. To think that a person that you trust, love, and share a bed and a life with could be plotting your murder is unsettling, to say the least," end quote. I'll say. She says that we now know because of Copycat Cato's book that he was, quote, scheming and plotting, end quote. The whole thing about texting his co-worker, Cody Roberts, saying he would go to Survey 319 first thing in the morning, shows that he was working it out so that he would be alone there that morning. She says it was his intention all along to kill his family and dispose of them there. In the weeks leading up to the murders, he was reportedly cold and distant towards Shanann and irritable with the girls. Sandy Rusick mentioned that he was driving fast and erratically while in North Carolina, so he was displaying reckless behavior, also known as a state of dangerous stupidity. And Frank told of him being disinterested and aloof with his family, and he had little patience with the girls. Then Miss Lena talks about the infamous doll photo that Shanann posted on Facebook. There are many speculations about that photo. It is said CW sent it to Shanann, and then Shanann posted it on Facebook. The Discovery says the picture originated from CW's phone. Many think the whole thing was a way to taunt Shanann, and I do agree. Some have said Krasenschmidt meant to send it to Nikolai. Too bad he didn't accidentally send one of his nudes to Shanann when he was refusing to sleep with her. She probably would have whipped his ass so bad he wouldn't have been able to murder his family. She would have been like, "So, what's up with this shit?" And then he would have either had to perform sexually or give some sort of explanation for the dick pic. The author says there, of course, is major significance to the doll photo. Poor Shanann was making light of it, having no idea it was a major threat from her psycho husband. She says Asshat is the most dangerous kind of person because of the way he came across to others. No one ever suspected he could do such a thing. Miss Lena says that's why it's so important to understand the profile of an evil monster like him. You very well could have one of these in your life right now. I found this in Discovery, which we've already been over it several times, but I just wanted to highlight it. Shanann was receiving warning signs. She felt danger in a big way, but like most of us, she ignored it. This is what she texted on August 7th to her friend Addie. Shanann told Addie, quote, "He has changed. I don't know who he is. I told him last night I don't feel safe with him after what he said about the baby. This fucking sucks. I really don't want to leave here." End quote. She had major warning signs, and she chose to ignore them. We're not very good as a society listening to our gut. That's like the most important. That voice you hear, that weird, I'm not talking like, you hear voices, but you know what I mean. It's your inner self. That funny feeling you get of just kind of doom and gloom, and you can't quite put your finger on it. Try to pay attention to it. Let me read this again. Shanann told Addie Maloney, her friend, quote, "He has changed. I don't know who he is. I told him last night I don't feel safe with him after what he said about the baby. This fucking sucks. I really don't want to leave here." I picked those 4 sentences out of a few texts, and when you put them together like that, it's very significant. She did not want to leave North Carolina with him, but she did. And she tried so hard to mend her marriage. She was fighting a losing battle. Buckface started hinting around to Shanann at the very last few days of her life that he was coming around. She really wanted to stay home instead of going to Arizona to just continue with the feeling closer to him, but he urged her to go. She had been so happy and hopeful at the little straws she was grasping at, that where he seemed like he was being his old self, Well, that shit didn't last long. Quote, "Why would Chris pretend he was open to working out their issues when it was clear he had no intention of doing so? Perhaps Chris was telling her what she wanted to hear to keep her off his back, knowing she wouldn't be around much longer to deal with." End quote. Also, the $62 charge at Lazy Dog. Basically, he gave 0 fucks at this point. He was no longer scared of getting caught from his wife, and he just wasn't going to hide shit anymore. So he boldly used his credit card for his date. Yeah, let's treat ourselves to a little more credit card debt. Shanann knew what the hell was going on. The behavior after the crimes also shows it was premeditated, according to Miss Lena. He was completely unaffected in his demeanor after disposing of the bodies, searching for Metallica song lyrics, taking pictures of the wildflowers, talking to the real estate agent about putting the house up for sale, responding to an email about fantasy football saying, "I'm in," calling the school to unenroll the girls, talking to his mistress, Nicolai. Well, I guess she could now be referred to as his girlfriend at this point. I was trying to decide if he's a douche canoe, or a fucktard, or a twat waffle, and then I just thought, he's all three, right? And more. These were not the actions of someone temporarily psychotic or traumatized from what he had just done. If it had all been a shock to him that he was capable of doing this, and he was caught off guard, how could he be so calm and normal, so-called normal acting? Him and Shanann would have been a normal couple if it weren't for him. He was just so jubilant. His family was now defunct that he made some major blunders by getting ahead of himself on launching his new life. He is just dumb fuck stupid. That's all one word, by the way. I save it for special occasions. This occasion is very fitting. He had asked Shanann to hold off on announcing the sex of the baby until Monday, knowing it would never happen, so this way he didn't have to deal with that part. In Christenshit's view, the newest pregnancy was a giant pain in his self-centered assholeness. He was acting like he had nothing to do with it and that Shanann had bamboozled him. Fuck him. Kim Gorgon says the psychologist Miss Lena interviewed for this book. She was mentioned last chapter as the one who takes the view that Christenshit could be a failed psychopath. She told Fox News that, quote, the murders committed by psychopaths are quite well thought out in nature, and the deliberate crime is more often than not committed by someone who wouldn't be ideally suspected, end quote. She also said his actions that day did not seem to reflect the actions of someone temporarily psychotic or traumatized from what he had just done. If it had all been a shock to him that he was capable of doing this and was caught off guard, how could he be so calm and, quote, normal, end quote? I have a brief news clip of Kim Gorgon's that I'm going to show at the end of this video. Pinhead was the last person people would have suspected when this first happened, at least by those that knew him. Although Nicole Atkinson wasn't fooled, neither was his neighbor Nate. Fuckface was acting totally unaffected by his family being so-called missing. He did not go about his plan in an intelligent or shrewd way, but it was thought out and well planned, at least to a certain extent, in his own specialized way of doing things, says Miss Lena. However, I did find his problem, why it didn't work as he had anticipated. It's 'cause he's a fucking dumbass, and he's a failed psychopath. He can't even be a psychopath, right? Miss Lena asks what we have all wondered. But if he did thoughtfully plan this crime in advance, why would he have made so many stupid mistakes? If he had a well-thought-out plan, wouldn't he have done a better job of covering his tracks, end quote? I'm so glad she covered these questions. She says if he indeed has narcissistic and psychopathic traits, then it makes sense that he would be overconfident and muddle up shit. Narcissists tend to think they are more intelligent than everyone else. They can't see the forest for the trees. But even if he was successful in making a grand plan, these are things that still could have fucked it all up. Shanann's flight delay, it gave him, or potentially gave him, less time to get things done at Survey 319 before his coworkers showed up. I've often wondered, is this why Shanann's grave was dug so shallow? Nikki Atkinson jumping into action mode and calling the police for a wellness check. She was alarmed straight away when she didn't hear from Shanann, especially given that it was the day after a Thrive trip when she would have been super duper motivated and pumped. Dumbass knew she was always texting and communicating with her team, which he called her people, and that many of them talked in group texts. Shanann not responding was noticed right away by more than Nikki Atkinson alone. For instance, Christina and Addie too. Having the police show up so soon gave Lunkhead less time to cover his tracks, although he did get to clean the crime scene from top to bottom that night after everyone left. He wanted people to believe she just up and ran off with the girls. If he is truly a narcissist, this story makes sense to him that others would believe it. Now remember, Miss Lena is not supposed to diagnose someone that she has not assessed in person and in a clinical setting. Or rather, it would be unethical of her, but she can do a bunch of that surmising stuff. But yeah, Lunkhead thought people would believe that Shanann ran off with the kids, and that everybody would feel sorry for him. Say there.
I was not worried. I just thought Shanann had run off with girls.
But then why would his dumbass call the school early that morning to say the kids would no longer be attending? Wouldn't you assume they were coming back if they ran off? But at the same time, dumbass, you didn't even know they were missing, supposedly. He thought he was being so smart, but he was just full of lies and contradictions. They just went to a friend's house for a play date. He supposedly did not know they were gone yet, but I guess one could believe he and Shanann had discussed the selling of the house sooner rather than later, and then she got pissed and ran off. Just boogered off, moved on, gone away, fucked off, to leave someone in a state of anguish. Fuck out of here with that shit. But as I said, he thought everyone would feel pity for him, and he would be free to go ahead and start his new life as a victim of a spiteful wife who is the mother to his children that are being withheld from him because she ran off. Then Miss Lena asked the same question we all have asked. Why? Why the hell did you do this? As prosecutor Michael Rourke said in the Coloradoan newspaper, quote, "How can we expect Watts to tell the entire truth about what happened?" End quote. His confession may have had many truths in it, but Pissface is clearly not a reliable source, considering how many lies he told. He's just a big fat liar pants. Big fat crybaby liar pants. Seems that D.A. Rourke and the investigators all believe for the most part that what C.W. has told in his tall tales are mostly true. Well, he's a goddamn liar pants, so we don't know if he's weaved a bit of truth into his 4 or 5 versions of what happened that night, morning, whatever. If his mouth is moving, he's lying. That's all I know for sure. I'm always disappointed when a liar's pants don't actually catch on fire. That pisses me off. Miss Lena says she doesn't believe this monster has the ability to have any remorse at all. I concur. Pissface does not ever have that uncomfortable sense of gnawing guilt or deep regret for his criminal offenses and misdeeds. He just doesn't care. Truly does not care. As in, it doesn't bother me at all. This is how I can stand in front of my house giving a light-hearted, vivacious press interview and be all smiles and shit. When he was whining and sniffling in his Wisconsin interview, he only seemed sad for himself. It was all about how he felt, or was trying to feel. He's dead inside. I wish he were dead on the outside too. When he finally does leave this earth, I hope they put him in a vat of oil. Actually, I prefer they do it while he's still alive, and it should be boiling. Can someone start a petition for this, please? Miss Lena says, quote, "The most compelling piece of evidence that matched up with Chris's story is the video footage that neighbor Nate had of Chris loading the truck the morning of the killings. When looking at the footage very closely, there's a small shadow beside Chris that is obviously one of his daughters. In the video, Chris bends down and scoops up the small body, putting her in the truck after loading Shanann's body. Rourke also said that video footage, quote, would be consistent with his statements that the girls were alive when they left the house and walked out to the truck. So, which story is true, D.A. Rourke? That does not match up with what you and Mr. Rusick said at sentencing. So which story is true, Inspector Gadget? It can't be both ways, that he hauled the bodies out to the truck. God almighty, son, what'd you do, haul off the bodies or something?
The cameras do not lie. You carry them out like trash of the house. Yes. I seen the videotape.
The defendant then methodically and calmly loaded their bodies into his work truck. Not in a hasty or disorganized way. He was seen from the neighbor's doorbell camera backing his truck into the driveway, going back and forth into the house and back out to the truck 3 different times, 1 time for each of their bodies.
Or that Bella and Cece walked out themselves. It can't be both ways, asshole. I mean, Mr. D.A. Rourke. Sir. The carefully constructed identity that Kristen should have built over a lifetime was crumbling just 2 days after he did this shit. Things were not going according to plan. He lost the new life that he wanted, and everyone, including co-workers, were finding out that not only was he an adulterer, but a murderer. And they not only knew how he disposed of his family, but some of them had to come and assist at the scene. That was hard for Pinhead to handle. Plus, people were being mean and asking lots of nosy questions. He didn't like that. He wanted it to stop. Fuck you all to hell and back, you stupid piece of shit. Now he thinks he's a celebrity. He should have been smothered at birth. Miss Lena says if he's the psycho-narcissist she thinks that he is, the reason he chose murder over divorce was he felt like this option gave him a clean start. The only clean start is, if you had gone back to your mother's womb, you dumbass, you should just go back there and stay there. But Pinhead didn't want the responsibility of having children. He didn't want the financial burdens that came with divorce and child support. In his warped peanut head mind, he was just wiping the slate clean. Yeah, let's start over if we don't like our life. I guess this explains unenrolling the children in their school and trying to get the house listed for sale right away. He wanted to get that slate wiped clean, right? For his new fantastic life. Quote, did Chris have a break from reality? Because Chris had no history of violence or anything in his past that would predict that he could be capable of any kind of violence. Many who followed this case thought he must have snapped. By snapped, it seems they think he had a break in reality or something sinister took over him. Thus, they believe his actions, murder of a pregnant wife and 2 young daughters, are not representative of who he really is, end quote. Alrighty then. Some that have watched the videos Shanann posted on her Facebook see what they believe to be a happy and involved father that loved his children, and that he just snapped and had a momentary lapse in sanity. Miss Lena says we're trying to rationalize it because it's hard to believe that someone could do that humans really can be evil monsters. I feel like we can spot someone that seems like they could do the wretchedness he did. It makes no rational sense to us. That's because we apparently aren't psychopathic narcissists. Pissface said at first he did this shit, quote, in a fit of rage because Shanann had killed the girls while he was downstairs minding his own business, making his lunch. And then he gave his oxymoronic statement that he killed the girls because he claims Shanann said he would never see the children again. So yeah, it makes sense you would follow that up with killing them, the children you were just told you weren't gonna see. His latest confession was that he planned it and he wasn't in a rage, and that an evil dark force had overtaken him. But the evil spirits are gone now, and according to Copycat Conundrum Cato's book, he did somewhat of an exorcism alone in his jail cell, so the dark evil shit is gone now. He is no longer a threat to the outside world. He is back to being a good boy, and he wants to become a religious preacher man when he grows up and gets out of prison for his good behavior. Oh yeah, and he regrets what he did now. He has some of that remorse stuff. Miss Lena says she, quote, spoke with Dr. Douglas Fields, a neuroscientist and author of Why We Snap, Understanding the Rage Circuit in Your Brain. He has researched this topic extensively and is a wealth of important information on understanding the root causes of violence. He says snapping occurs in people without mental illness or psychosis. They aren't crazy, they are mentally healthy people, and they can snap in the right situation. They become overwhelmed. Well, Fucktard doesn't fall into that mentally healthy people category, but he does fall under that batshit crazy umbrella. Not only does he have bats in his belfry, but they've been there so long that the belfry is now covered in bat shit. Hence, batshit crazy. Fields also explained that, quote, understanding the neuroscience and how the brain operates can be helpful in addition to knowing the triggers that unleash violence. Life stressors also lower the threshold and almost always contribute to acts of violence. We all have the capacity for violence because, as a species, we need to protect ourselves, our young, and our family, end quote. Most humans have it in their nature to protect their young, not murder them. This is another reason I do not believe Chris and shit asshat Watts to be human. Miss Lena says, quote, we all have aggression wired into our brains. We are all capable of violence. When we feel threatened, we have to decide if we want to be violent. Most of us will if we deem it necessary, end quote. In Dr. Fields' article titled Neuroscience, Blind Rage, and the Killing at Card Rock, end quote, he says, and then the doctor just starts nannering on and on and on about neuro stuff and the brain's rage circuits and how when the hypothalamus has been inactivated, aggressive response fades away, stuff like that. And it just got to be a bit much for me. Thankfully, he gave an example for us regular folk that don't dissect human brains. Say, for example, someone bumps into you in a crowd. Your immediate response is to tense up and feel a twinge of anger or annoyance. However, if the person says, "Oh, I'm sorry," that anger and annoyance melts away almost immediately. This is because you realize that your rage was a misfire. A misfire is when we realize that the perceived threat really is not a threat, and the knee-jerk response was our primitive survival mechanisms kicking in. Dr. Fields believes that understanding your misfires and your triggers are helpful ways for people to deal with rage and could potentially stop violence from occurring. End quote. This is what Lunkhead should have been studying instead of Googling love letters. Yes, he really did Google love letters. And then the book goes on, quote, his book goes into detail about the specific triggers that trip the rage response in humans. He created the mnemonic called life morts, which mnemonic is a pattern of letters, ideas, or associations that assists in remembering something. But the 9 triggers of violence are the following. Life or limb. This is when you feel that your life is threatened or that you may be at risk to suffer serious injury. Insult. It's important to note that the perception of insult that triggers rage. What was said that was perceived as an insult may not be intended to be one. Family. If you feel your family is threatened, especially offspring, siblings, parents, etc., your rage response can be triggered. This is a basic instinct in both animals and people. Family is what carries the genes, and we have an instinct to pass on these genes. Next, environment. This is the instinct to protect your home or your property. People and animals are territorial. We need our home or territory for survival. Mate. As Fields' book succinctly states, quote, the Darwinian drive to pass on genes from the fittest individuals is the bedrock underlying the ready willingness to fight to the death over mates, end quote. Order in society. Fields' book explains this as, quote, violence is used to enforce the rules of society, to assure fairness, and to correct transgressions. Rage attacks frequently break out in response to a perceived social injustice. The trigger often incites mob violence. I'm noticing a lot of this is your perceived response. So I think what the main takeaway here is learn to control your initial response to jump at something. This can be learned to not immediately jump on shit. Also known as jumping the gun or your knee-jerk reaction. Next is resources. This is about protecting our resources. Human beings react with violence in order to prevent theft of the resources that are crucial to their survival, like your home, your house, etc., just your personal belongings, your money. Tribe. Protecting the tribe is a form of altruistic behavior, but it also divides and leads to violence. Tribalism is an us versus them attitude. According to Dr. Fields, quote, it is the basis for racism and war. Avoiding this trigger is essential for peace, end quote. and last stopped. Field says, quote, being restrained, cornered, imprisoned, or impeded from the liberty of pursuing one's desires will trip this trigger of rage, end quote. This trigger misfires in certain situations, such as someone cutting you in line at the store, or on a much larger scale, this trigger can also happen when someone is experiencing oppression because they are prevented from having the same benefits of society as others. Because the main motivation for this crime was to start a new life with Nikki, Chris's rage at his wife and children may have been tripped by the S trigger, which is stopped. He wanted to start a new life and felt that Shanann and the girls were in the way of that blissful riding into the sunset fantasy bullshit life he had. In the Copycat Cattle book, Chris indicates overwhelming piss-offedness towards his wife and daughters. This lying sack of shit describes being enraged that Bella and Cece were still alive after his initial attempt to smother them. When he pushes Shanann's body into the shallow grave face down, he describes being so furious with her that he didn't feel the need to change how she landed. God, he's a fucking monster. Quote, Chris was in the middle of a conflict between his parents and wife. When Shanann and the girls got back from North Carolina, he could no longer live the single lifestyle or carry on the double life he was leading with Nikki, Nikolai. There was a third baby on the way, one he didn't want. He wanted out of his marriage, but realistically, he knew that leaving the marriage and keeping his new relationship a secret would not be easy at all. A combination of the stress and the life mort's triggers, those things we just went over, could have helped take Chris over the edge and tripped his wires for violence. Remembering that snapping is a break from reality and not sanity, would it even be possible for Chris to have snapped, considering he planned the crime for weeks? I asked Dr. Fields if the process of snapping could last hours, days, or even weeks. Miss Lena goes on to say, I personally always had a suspicion that this crime was premeditated over the course of days or weeks. I was skeptical if snapping could last over prolonged periods of time. Dr. Fields says that snapping, or a break from reality, can go on for a long time before someone comes out of it and feels remorse. So, according to him, it is possible that Chris could have had a break from reality during the time he premeditated the crime and up until the point he says he started to feel remorse, end quote. In hindsight, he has remorse because he is missing the comfortable life he used to have, but that's not necessarily remorse for what he's done. It's hard to say how many people have genuine remorse after they've snapped, or if they are just devastated because they've ruined their lives due to their actions. Dr. Fields does believe that many of these people have genuine remorse, and people write to him from prison thanking him for his book and helping them make sense of their crimes. Whether Chris's violent acts are related to psychopathy, narcissism, the phenomenon of snapping, or a combination of all of these things would be impossible to fully determine with certainty. But it seems probable that it's a combination of all of them. He could have had psychopathic and/or narcissistic traits to begin with, and then had his S trigger tripped in his brain and experienced a break from reality. His break from reality could have given him the delusional mindset that killing his family would be a good option, thinking he could get away with it. Now as he sits in prison, and regardless of whether his remorse is genuine, he can see that killing his family was a horrible idea. I hope so, but I don't think he has remorse. The only remorse he has is not getting away with it. It's helpful to understand from neuroscience what causes violence. Yes, I've always thought to myself it would be helpful for me to understand violence from a neuroscience point of view. Not. Please. Y'all, this last chapter is more than I can bear. I feel like I'm in 12th grade again, sweating in my science and math classes, thinking I wasn't going to graduate because this shit just did not make sense to me. This is way more involved than I wanted to get in reviewing a book. I'm not having fun anymore. So this last part of this very long and involved chapter, I'm just going to skip over a few things. I mean, shit, I'm already like a half hour into this and I'm not done yet. This feels like when I was working from the other side of town and it felt like I was never going to get home from work every night because of the maddening traffic. I'm telling you, if I were reading this book on my own, I would have given up by now. Miss Lena says, I'm often asked to defend people in court because defense attorneys are always looking for this kind of excuse that they had no control, and I don't testify in those situations. Ultimately, it seems that the perfect storm of our genetics, personality traits, environment, and life stressors play a role in why we snap. Many of us know what the feeling of rage is, or we at least know what it's like to be pushed to a point where we feel like we could explode. However, we don't commit murder or hurt others. Most of us certainly don't plot the murders of our spouses and children because it goes against our basic human code. There's something in us that stops things from going too far. And only in extreme situations where we may have to defend ourselves from injury or death would we ever resort to violence. Chris Asshat Watts made selfish decisions. In many ways, he was the architect of his own stress. That sounds like the shit I was talking about a couple of weeks back. We create our own drama. That's Kimberly's wise shit to say. There are people who have had way more stress in their lives than fuckface, and they would never make the choices he did. How do you spot the red flags and protect yourself? Miss Lena says, as I researched and wrote this book, I have continued to hold the belief that no one could have ever seen this tragedy coming or stopped it from happening. As I stated before, if Shanann had any inkling her husband was capable of murdering her and her children, she would have never left him alone with the girls. If anyone close to Shanann and Chris thought this was possible, I'm sure they would have done something to try and stop it from happening. Not one person interviewed who knew Chris personally could have fathomed he was capable of murdering his own family. This case has certainly been one that gives people pause. Even really smart people get duped. Sometimes smart people get duped more because they think they're immune to it, especially when it comes to love. We want to believe the best in people. We want to believe in the happily ever after, so we give the benefit of the doubt, end quote. Most people who have affairs and devalue their partners do not commit these types of murders. Miss Lena says, however, I believe it's important to include some red flags and tips to help you protect yourself and familiarize yourself with the warning signs of potentially dangerous people in hopes that it could help you or your loved ones. I'm going to shorten this shit up a lot. Miss Lena goes into great detail explaining these signs. I just can't. I'm so over this. It's not that I don't want to help you. It's just these last few chapters were extremely long and extremely involved, and I'm over it. Me and my fibromyalgia shit are over it. Me and my ADD shit are over it. But despite that, let's finish this. I don't quit shit. Like, I don't quit my bad habits. I'm not going to quit this shit. So that was me having one of those outburst things that Miss Lena was talking about, but I didn't get all violent and shit. I'm too tired and I don't have the strength to be violent, but if I could, I would throw a tantrum right now. As I said, I'm over it, but let's finish. Okay, so we ended up with most people who have affairs and devalue their partners do not commit these types of murders. They exhibit no empathy for you or your perspective. Chris started to show extreme empathy deficits in the weeks before the killings. Chris didn't display any empathy for his wife or his children once he started the affair with Nikki. Chris was ready to walk away from his family and a pregnant wife with absolutely no remorse or explanation. If somebody is ready to discard you and get rid of you without communicating or trying, it might be best to let them walk, says Miss Lena. I agree. Don't fight it. Let them go. Say, okay, bye. They gaslight you. Gaslighting manipulates someone else into doubting their own sanity. For example, when Shanann asked Chris at the beach in North Carolina if there was someone else, he denied it. Even though she had a feeling that something was off, she knew something was very wrong, and he denied the truth, and that made her doubt her own sanity. Shanann was forced to question everything. What happened? How did he fall out of love with her so fast? What did she do wrong? Did he meet someone else? Her gut was telling her something was wrong, but she wasn't getting straightforward answers. Therefore, she wasn't sure what was reality anymore. Your gut is telling you when something is very wrong. The most effective and accurate tool any human being has is their gut feeling. Now that Chris is in prison for the rest of his life, his urges to be important, special, and a martyr seem to be coming to the surface. Dr. Robbie Ludwig, a psychologist, wrote a Fox News article, quote, "How could a man like Chris Watts so callously slaughter his entire family?" In the article, she says Chris Watts may not have been able to find his relevance in the real world, but seems to have found it in prison. In prison, Chris feels more like an important man, the man he always thought he should be. He gets fan mail and love letters. His newly revealed confessions after, quote, finding God are making him even more of a global star, albeit a notorious one. He's making his mark on history, or so he thinks. His egotistical plan and sick need for distinction and recognition are finally being met. Criminality led to his celebrity, end quote. Chris says he now believes his mission and purpose in life is to help and serve others through God. Can y'all see my eyes rolling? Whatever demons he had been hiding throughout his entire life are now exposed, but he refuses to accept that people see him as a monster. He doesn't want to be judged and wants a second chance. In prison, he believes he's been given another chance. He is oddly grateful for this new beginning, and in his own words said, quote, "I never knew I could have a relationship with God like I do now. That's the amazing grace in all of this. I wish no one had to pay a price for it. I know everyone has a purpose. I just hope I can find mine." I just fucking threw up in my mouth a little bit. People associated with the case have experienced their own trauma and still have nightmares about things like oil tanks. Chris Watts single-handedly destroyed the lives of not only Shanann's friends and family, but the lives of strangers who had to immerse themselves in the case. Chris doesn't seem to care very much. After all, he's told Cadel that he's content in prison. It's hard to imagine being content after you've ruined so many people's lives. Chris Watts says he wishes in hindsight that no one had to pay the price for him to have a relationship with God, but Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico paid the ultimate price. Is there anything we can learn from this tragedy? I can't help but think if Chris knew how to deal with his emotions or had a clue about how he was unfairly misdirecting his anger at his wife and his kids, the outcome might have been different. Even if he is a psychopath or narcissist or both, it is still possible he could have gone through life as a nonviolent person had he been given the proper tools, says Miss Lena. We'll never know if things could have been different or if Chris was always destined to go down a path like this. The most terrifying part of all of this is we will probably never be able to prevent violence. We don't have the control that we would like in this world. Repeating myself again, says Miss Lena, I don't believe there is any way Shanann or anyone else could have seen this coming. Did Chris Watts dupe everyone? According to Abby Ellen, dupers are successful because they believe their own lies. Her takeaway, and mine, says Miss Lena, is that there's no foolproof way to avoid being duped because, quote, we don't really ever know anybody else. That's right. We find out after the fact that they, like Chris and shit asshat fucktard Watts, are a dickhole brain dribbling muppet, malignant window looker, dickweed, ape covered in human flesh, ass hair, dumb and dumber, haircut piss weasel, bucket doorknob, not fastest scooter on the boardwalk, lame brain, kick rock, self-serving, farm bot, daft, abbot, fuckwit, manipulative, wassa, bell end, evil asshole with no soul, late pillock, dumb shell, silly chuff, scrubber, fucking potato, chuntering, nutbuck, plebe, badass, smarty, horse's ass, trammel, goon, gobside, pond piss, shitbag, ass-licking piece of buffalo shit, pushover ass face, self-centered, no conscience, dinkhead, gigantic flaming pile of shit, douche-tart, his smug ass sitting in prison, freedom from all responsibilities and content, feeling he has been forgiven by God. Bless his delusional heart. You're crazy as showing, piss face. You might want to tuck it back in. I want to slap him across the face with a 2x4 really hard, repeatedly. He needs to piss the fuck off. And that, thank God, is the end of the book. Stick a fork in me. I'm done. But let me summarize for you. The universe tries to protect you and alert you with a bad feeling, like Shanann did when Asshat kept pestering her for a date until she gave in. Your gut knows what's up. Trust that bitch. Don't trust everything you see. Even salt looks like sugar. Salty shit can be disguised as sweet shit. Stay tuned for a few brief news stories. One features Kim Gorgons, that's been mentioned in the book, and the other two are Daily Mail exclusives with Cheryl and Copycat Cadle. I'll have another video for you guys very soon. I'm not going anywhere. Much love and peace. Thank you for listening.
She can't definitively say that Watts is a psychopath, but Kim Gorgon says he does possess a lot of the characteristics of one. Gorgon's, like many of us, has been closely following this case, trying to figure out what could lead a man to murder his own family.
There really were no warning signs.
These Facebook photos and videos tell a story, the story of a happy marriage and a doting father who appeared to love his wife and two little girls. But we now know there was a much darker side to Chris Watts, a man who now admits he killed his pregnant wife.
It isn't a personality characteristic that you're going to pick out of a lineup. It's not as if someone wears a sign to say, you can't trust me. In fact, it's just the opposite of that.
Dr. Kim Gorgons is a clinical professor at the University of Denver who specializes in the psychology of criminal behavior. She believes Watts may very likely be a psychopath.
Someone who is really winsome, charming, and psychopathic, it's not unusual for them to evade detection.
Gorgon says 5 to 7% of all people are psychopathic. Many, but not all, have criminal records.
Oftentimes, they'll never offend in an illegal capacity, and they may actually rise to fame in politics or as a CEO or CFO of a business.
Murders committed by psychopaths are typically well thought out and deliberate, often committed by someone you'd never suspect.
Persons who have a psychopathic personality are granted intimate access to people because they're really good at building those relationships and mimicking emotions.
Watts claimed he murdered his wife only after he saw Shanann strangling one of their daughters. Reactionary behavior, not consistent with a psychopath. But only time will tell whether his story is what really happened.
Killer dad Chris Watts' chilling confession. A disturbing letter that the convicted murderer sent his prison pen pal reveals never-before-heard details about how he killed his two daughters and his pregnant wife.
Cheyenne Roundtree has more on the exclusive story from our New York newsroom. Cheyenne, what do you have for us?
Jesse, the details in this letter are extremely disturbing. Daily Mail TV has seen the letters in which Chris Watts confesses to murdering his family and explains how he did it. He writes, I went to the girls' room first before Shannon and I had our argument. I went to Bella's room, then Cece's room, and used a pillow from their bed to kill them. That's why the cause of death was smothering. Leaving his daughters to be dead, Watts then killed Shannon, but while in the process of doing so, the children woke up and walked into the room bruised and traumatized, so he had to suffocate them again. The letter was sent to Cheryl Cadle, a 65-year-old grandmother who visited Watts 3 times in person and spoken to him a few times a week on the phone, with their most recent conversation taking place last week. Cadle used these conversations as well as a letter from her new book, Letters from Christopher.
In this Daily Mail TV exclusive, we're hearing from killer dad Chris Watts' pen pal, and she claims Watts gave her a true confession. Cheryl Lynn Cadle is opening up about her one-on-one conversations with the convicted killer. She's revealing new, disturbing details about how and why he killed his pregnant wife and 2 daughters.
He did feel that had he never met Nikki, this would never have happened.
Cheryl Lynn says Chris Watts plotted the murder of his wife and 2 daughters so he could be with his mistress, Nicole Kessinger.
She had almost a spell. He was so attracted to her that he was mesmerized by her. And she showed him respect, and he didn't feel like he had ever been shown that before.
It's just one of the shocking revelations made in Cheryl Lynn's new book, Letters from Christopher. The grandmother of 11 says she was compelled to meet with Watts after first seeing him on the news.
The very first morning that I saw Christopher, it just struck me. There was such a lost look at when watching him on television that day.
There was never any doubt in your mind that he was guilty of these crimes?
Never. any doubt at all.
Cheryl Lynn and Watts exchanged multiple letters. She showed the correspondence to DailyMail.com senior reporter Louise Boyle.
You can see here his writing is small, and this is like a 10, 12-page letter here that he's written.
You'll recall Watts first told investigators he killed Shanann in a fit of rage.
He told me that he was not angry. It did not happen in a fit of rage like he had told the FBI. That it happened very calmly as she was drifting off to sleep, that he knew how to squeeze the jugular veins in her neck to cut off the oxygen supply.
Cheryl Lynn also met with Watts at the Wisconsin prison where he's serving a life sentence.
One thing that bothered me is he wouldn't look at me in the eye. He wants people to think good of him. It's very hard for him to be called a monster or to be called a murderer.
Only here on NBC Charlotte, a North Carolina mother taking these family vacation photos in Myrtle Beach, capturing Shanann Watts and her 2 daughters just days before they were murdered, allegedly by Shanann's husband and the girl's father, Chris Watts. The woman who took these pictures says she spoke with Shanann while their children played and recalls Chris acting strange. NBC Charlotte's Savannah Levin's live tonight with these exclusive details. Savannah?
Yeah, that mom told me she has no doubt Shanann was completely devoted to her girls. And of course, she was horrified to hear what happened to them just days after they met.
She was very lovable with her girls. It was all about her girls.
Michelle Greer and her husband took their 3 sons to Myrtle Beach this month, and that's where they met the Watts family, in line with the kids for the bungee trampolines. Michelle and Shanann hit it off right away.
She told me she was expecting, so she was very happy she was expecting again. She was wonderful with the girls. She was very happy that they were there.
But she says Chris, on the other hand,
he didn't engage in conversation at all. He was just kind of standing there.
In the background of Michelle's photos, you can see Shanann taking photos of 4-year-old Bella. What appears to be Shanann's father beside her, Chris, turned off to the side behind his wife. The photos were taken August 2nd. Less than 2 weeks later, the news hit that Shanann and her girls were murdered, allegedly by Chris.
Did you recognize the family right away?
I did. I was heartbroken because I literally had just spoken with her 2 weeks ago. It wasn't just somebody I was reading about on the news. It was somebody I had engaged in a conversation with. I had seen her children. So it did hit hard.
And Michelle says she doesn't buy Chris's side of the story, newly revealed in an affidavit unsealed yesterday.
Now Chris is saying Shanann killed the girls. What do you make of that?
I don't believe it one bit. The person I saw interacting with her kids is not the person that would have killed her children.
She says these photos are chilling to her now, a happy moment frozen in time before the unfathomable horror that shocked and crushed the nation.
It is very eerie.
Chris was in court today, formally charged with 9 felonies, including the murders of his 2 daughters and his wife. But his side of the story is that he saw his wife Shanann strangling the girls and in a fit of rage strangled his wife. Time will only tell what the jury believes.